Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. Thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. And if you'd like to become a patron or find out about it, then just pop along to patreon.com/The History Network. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 30, Episode 9, The Battle of Landguard Fort, a dreadful spectacle as ever any English man saw. This episode was written by Simon Keynes, continuing his coverage of the attempted attacks and invasions of England over the centuries. His great-great-grandfather was in the English militia guarding the coast during the American War of Independence. Simon enjoys battlefield guided tours and has been researching and writing local history since retiring during the COVID lockdowns. There have been very few occasions since the 1300s when a foreign navy or army have been able to damage English ports and land troops, but this occurred twice within a month during June and July 1667. The Dutch raid on the River Medway is fairly well known, a humiliating defeat for the Royal Navy. Less than a month later, the Dutch landed a force on the other side of the Thames estuary, hoping to capture and hold Landguard Fort, but this time they were driven off by the army and militia. England and the Netherlands were natural allies when they both became Protestant, which finally happened in England in 1558 when Elizabeth I was crowned Queen. In 1585 the Queen sent Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, with 5,000 to 6,000 troops to the Netherlands to help in their revolt against the Spanish rulers of the Netherlands. England also had the support of the Dutch in a war with Spain from 1625 to 1630. The Dutch finally achieved independence from Spain in 1648. Relations between the two countries then became worse, particularly due to English resentment that the Dutch were not more grateful for their help. Also, there were many clashes concerning the two countries' ambitions to capture foreign colonies, such as in the East Indies. An English delegation in 1651 to The Hague suggested an alliance with the Dutch to perhaps take over the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, but the Dutch saw this would be a very unequal alliance and reacted angrily. The English Parliament decided on confrontation instead, which soon led to war. The Three Anglo-Dutch Wars from 1652 to 1674 were largely fought at sea. The first war from 52 to 54 ended essentially in a stalemate. After 11 years of peace, war broke out for a second time for another 2 years. The English had already captured several Dutch colonies in West Africa and their large North American possession covering several of the modern states around New York. But in this war, the Dutch brought the fighting right onto England's shores on 2 occasions. In August 1666, during a raid on the Vlei estuary in the Netherlands, English troops burnt the village of West Terschelling, known as Holmes' Bonfire, so the Dutch population wanted revenge. In May 1667, an English peace delegation arrived at Breda, but the Dutch government decided that attacks were the best way to a favourable peace. The Dutch launched the raid on the Medway 9th to the 14th of June 1667, capturing and destroying many English ships. A large Dutch fleet sailed to the mouth of the River Medway on the 10th of June, which was guarded by the unfinished Sheerness fort with 16 guns. Unfortunately, the very first round fired by each gun wrecked its carriage, and the fortification did not protect the men from return fire, so they soon abandoned the fort. Dutch soldiers landed on the Isle of Sheppey, and there is a story, which is still remembered today, that the mayor of the town of Queensborough surrendered by running up the white flag. Sheerness town was bombarded by Dutch ships and then captured by troops who captured the naval stores there. The only other defence of the Medway was a chain across the river, guarded by 3 frigates, including the Unity, but many men on the Unity were pressed Thames watermen, so they quickly took the chance to abandon ship when attacked, and the Unity was captured. The guard ship Charles V managed to sink one Dutch fireship, but soon set on fire by another. A Dutch fireship broke through the chain and then set fire to the last of the guard frigates. The English flagship Royal Charles was also moored nearby, but was only half-rigged and had a skeleton crew, so they also deserted, and 7 Dutch sailors were able to capture this ship. The Dutch continued upriver, setting fire to any ships they could not take away, while the chief of the Admiralty, the Duke of Albemarle, General Monk, ordered 3 great ships to be run aground and flooded, rather than be captured. The Dutch fireships managed to get through a bombardment from Upnor Castle and another gun battery to set these last 3 ships on fire. The Dutch finally ran out of fireships and withdrew on the 14th of June, taking the Royal Charles and Unity, but not before another landing on the Isle of Sheppey to capture some livestock. Samuel Pepys, secretary to the Navy Board, was at an inquiry into the disaster on the 19th of June, but the Dutch fleet was not finished yet. They planned to repeat their success 2 weeks later by capturing the Landguard fort, which is at the mouth to the River Stour on the other side of the Thames estuary, and so blockade the port and shipyard upriver at Harwich. The Dutch fleet was joined by 5 troop transports and made its way carefully through the shoals and anchored off Cobbold's Point, approximately 3 miles northeast of Landguard Fort, on the 2nd of July. Troops and sailors disembarked from noon. It took a couple of hours. The total figures vary widely between sources, but probably somewhat in excess of 1,650, including over 200 pikemen, and carrying scaling ladders, grenades, axes, and other things for the assault. The Dutch troops were under Colonel Dolman, Count van Hoorn, and Lieutenant Colonel Palm. The landing place was at a gap in the cliffs, which also made it easier to defend because the beach could not be outflanked by the enemy. This location is now in the town of Felixstowe. A rear guard under Count van Hoorn, including all the pikemen, remained at the top of the cliff, along with 2 or 3 small cannon known as Sekedriks, guarding the only route down to the Dutch ships. The assault on Landguard Fort was led by an English renegade, Colonel Thomas Dolman, one of many Cromwell supporters who joined the Dutch after the restoration of Charles II, rather than serve under another English king. Sir Philip Parker's militia regiment of the White, with approximately 1,500 militia and 3 troop of horse, approached from the north-east. They had started ferrying infantry south over the mouth of the River Devon, with the cavalry horses tied to the boats, to get towards the landing place, but 4 Dutch gunboats sailed into the river mouth to fire at the boats and prevented any further movement. Several hundred soldiers may have already crossed, but the cavalry had to ride 10 miles upriver to cross at Woodridge, then 15 miles back to the landing place. The crossing was not made safe until 4 p.m, when a strong ebb tide pushed the Dutch boats away. Landguard Fort was managed by Captain Nathaniel Darrell's company of Marines and a company under Captain Cartwright. On the morning of the battle, a militia unit were exercising near the landing place. They followed orders to march to the fort without being seen by the Dutch. The fort was now considerably better defended than the Dutch had expected, and the construction also made it much more formidable. There were approximately 140 Marines and 300 militiamen at the fort. The Dutch had planned a combined operations attack on the fort, 2 groups of warships under 2 admirals, would bombard the fort from the east and the south with 18-pound cannonballs at close range, while their troops approached the fort from the north. But the water was too shallow for Vice Admiral Evertson's 6 men-of-war to approach within range, and the English had sunk some block ships. Rear Admiral Van Niese's ship ran aground, throwing this part of the attack into confusion. By contrast, a small English ship, a galliot, with only 2 or 3 guns, managed to sail out from the river to the seaward side of the fort and fired at the Dutch troops, with the beach pebbles giving a shrapnel effect, which was said to be a significant factor in forcing the Dutch to retreat. The Dutch troops marched the 3 miles to the fort and made 2 attempts to storm it at 5 p.m. and 6 p.m, but both were repelled by musket fire from the masses of English soldiers and militia, and cannon fire from the galliot, so they finally retreated, leaving 20 scaling ladders. The Dutch rear guard above the landing place came under serious attack from about 4:30 p.m, but the small cannon were effective against the English cavalry. Some 1,500 Suffolk militia foot had crossed the Devon river by 6 p.m, but were driven off by the Dutch rear guard. The Dutch had all re-embarked by 10 p.m. The English victory at Landguard Fort hardly made up for the huge losses in the Medway. The English quickly signed the Treaty of Breda on the 28th of July, bringing the Second Anglo-Dutch War to an end. The Third Anglo-Dutch War began in 1672, after King Charles II signed the secret Treaty of Dover with France, in which he agreed to convert to Catholicism and send 60 warships and 4,000 soldiers to help France conquer the Dutch Republic in return for a pension from the French, and the French agreed to send 6,000 troops to England if there was a rebellion against Charles II. This treaty was not published until 100 years later. After 2 years of fighting, the English Parliament forced Charles to stop his war. In 1688, the English invited the Dutch William of Orange to take over the crown from Catholic James II. This should have cemented an alliance between the two countries, and they did both join a European coalition against France during the 9 Years' War of 1688 to 1697, but they later went to war again twice. During the American War of Independence, the Netherlands joined with France and Spain against Great Britain in 1780, and in the Napoleonic Wars, the Dutch revolutionaries supported Napoleon, and the Netherlands became the Batavian Republic in 1795. A joint Anglo-Russian army landed near Den Helder in Holland and operated for several months, but with the signing of the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1814, the Dutch finally changed sides and their army fought with Wellington at Waterloo. One consequence of the raid on the Medway was that for a long time the people of Queensborough on the Isle of Sheppey considered that there had been a white flag of surrender, and so they liked to say they were still allied with the Dutch, until a ceremony in 1967 when a party of Dutch people in period costume came to lower the Dutch flag and hand back the town. It still holds an annual Queensborough Independence Day celebration every year. At the site of the Landguard battle, the River Devon ferry boat is still in operation at the same location for foot passengers only. In 1667, Landguard Fort was the typical Civil War four-bastion design, but it has been rebuilt many times since the battle. It can be found to the seaward side of the Harwich container port. It is now run by English Heritage. Their website reminds us that it was the site of the last opposed seaborne invasion of England by the Dutch in 1667, who were repulsed by the Royal Marines in their first land battle. Well, thank you, Simon, for writing another script for us. It's great to have that from you. If you would like to write a script for us, or you have an idea for a podcast subject which you'd like us to cover, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Simon Keynes, read by Nick Barker.